In Home Networking Part 2, we're going to cover the 5 or 3, depending on how you look at it, things that you're likely to do with a router or a gateway of your own. So let's take a look at the interface of a common router. Too many choices, I would say. If you know how to log into your router, you'll be able to find the place where you can do the things you need to do, such as these first 3 things, possibly the last 2 too. Just try not to be intimidated. So let's start with logging into the device. First thing you're going to do is pull up a command prompt to figure out what the address is of your router. You type CMD into the search bar, then the command prompt. Then we're going to type something specific in at the blinking cursor, IPCONFIG. Then hit enter. You probably have to scroll up in the command prompt to see what your default gateway is. If you have to write that down, that's okay. Next step, we're going to actually type that address into the browser. So open up your favorite browser, clear everything out, and type that default gateway address in there. In my case, 192.168.11. Then when you hit enter, you should be prompted with your login. Now, we're going to take a little sidebar here. Let's take a look at default passwords for various devices. So if I wanted to know what the default password is for one of those Xfinity/Comcast gateways, it's this difficult. Just type your search in and you can see that it's admin and password. You're going to find that to be pretty common. So let's try a Linksys router. What is the default password for a Linksys router? Admin password. So that makes my argument that you should be changing your default password. So to prove my point, let's look at a Netgear router and see what its default password is. My router happens to be an ASUS router, and its password happened to be, by default, admin and password. So let's actually log into my router here. So I'll type in the username and type in the password. And zabing, we're in my router. And here's an actual picture of this router that you're looking at the interface of. So let's cover how you actually change this admin password. So we're in my router here, and I'm going to go down to administration, which is typically where it is. So I'll click that. Look around here. Well, I don't see anything that would help me change a password there. If I click on system, yep. Now a little sidebar here. What we're doing is changing the router password, not the wireless password. We will get to that next. So if we're back in my router here, we look at the place to change it. You can leave the username admin and just do something that isn't password. Something simple is better than just leaving it password. So let's take a look at how we might do this on some different routers. Here's where you do it on a Linksys router. Here is where you would do it on an Xfinity gateway. Yes, the troubleshooting area. That's right. And on CenturyLink ActionTech, you do it in advanced setup. So let's look at the most common thing you're going to probably do with your router or gateway. Change the wireless settings. Most of the time, you're probably going to click on something called wireless. And most devices today are sprouting 2 different networks, a 5 gigahertz and a 2.4 gigahertz network. There you can see my 5 gigahertz network, which I'm not using on my phone. And let's do a brief sidebar here and cover the difference between 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. 2.4 gigahertz has better range, and 5 gigahertz has slightly worse range, but a lot better performance at times. This is also where you set your password. And I suggest a phrase, something longer that's a phrase and easy to remember may be better than something shorter and more complex. So let's take a look at where you would find these things on some different router types. Linksys, this is where you'd find it, pretty intuitive. On a gateway from Xfinity, you'd click on Connection, then Wi-Fi. And on CenturyLink, it's pretty intuitive too. You'd check the status of your router to see if you are in fact connected to the internet. You could do this on a Linksys right there by clicking Status, on a Netgear by clicking Router Stat. Checking which devices are connected to your router or gateway can be kind of interesting. You might be surprised how many things appear to be connected to your device. So if I click on my clients, I want you to pay attention to that device right there. That's my phone. And here in a moment, I'm going to go ahead and turn the Wi-Fi off on my phone by clicking that or tapping on that, and then watch. Poof, it's gone. Let's look at the place you can do the same thing on some other devices. Here's a Netgear. Here's where you do it on an Xfinity gateway. And Network Map is how you do it on a modern Linksys router. To recap what we've covered so far, this is all you're likely to ever do on your router or gateway. Really, it's probably only the first three things. You may want to check the status of your connection sometimes, and maybe you're interested in finding out what's attached to your device too. But the first three are really key, and that's all you need to know with all the huge amount of things you can do on a router or gateway. So logging into your router or gateway, first thing you do is you pull up a command prompt and figure out what the IP address is of your default gateway. Next, you type that number right into the browser and hit enter, and then you should be prompted with a username and password. To change that default password, which is all too easy, you'd probably be doing that in the administration section of your router or gateway. But there's an exception. The Xfinity or Comcast gateways, it's in the troubleshooting section for some reason. Wireless settings, that's a very, very common place to visit. That's where you're going to set the network name, also known as the SSID, more technically known as the SSID. And you're going to set the password for getting onto the network name. That you might have two because often they're sending out signal for 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. So you might have two network names like I do on mine. You might want to check the status of your device if you have network access, but you can't get anything on the internet. So you could go in there and check to see if you have a public IP address, or if you have a bunch of zeros, or 169.254 or something like that. Tech support may get you going through that too. The other thing to keep in mind is that if this occurs, go ahead and power cycle everything. Power cycle if you have both a router and a modem, power cycle your modem first, then your router, and wait around for a minute and a half and see if you can connect again. Attached devices could just be morbid interest. You know, what all is connected to my device. It's probably going to be more things than you thought. And you may see things there that are turned off that appear to be connected. The other reason you might want to check attached devices is to see if you have any freeloaders, like your neighbors or somebody parked out in front of your house hopping on your network, or hackers. Well, that's networking part 2. Thank you for watching.